Greetings, everybody, and howdy, friends and neighbors. Welcome to the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Keith Billick, and I hope you're all having a great summer so far. Although with the current situation, it's hard to keep track of the days and months and weeks, but I'm pretty sure it's summer. It's been nice out and warm. But one thing I know for sure is that whatever time of the year it is, it's the perfect time of the year to be listening to some great new banjo music. And that is partially the reason why I'm doing this new freshly picked series. For those of you new to the podcast, or for those who maybe have not heard the last few episodes, typically this podcast features either banjo lessons taught by myself or someone else, but the vast majority of them are one-on-one interviews with either some of your or my favorite players, or maybe some players that you didn't know about but now get to discover. But they're all very inspiring, and I love getting to do that. However, the current situation limits me from getting together with these players, so a new approach is to just feature good new music that's coming out, and that's what the Freshly Picked series is all about. And this is going to be the second of those episodes, and this one will feature an album titled Primetime by the trio Crary, Evans, and Barnick. Bill Evans, of course, being the banjo player of that trio, and this being a banjo podcast. He will be the one that I'm talking with today as a spokesperson for the group, and you'll get to hear all about that. But first, I just want to remind you of a few other things. One thing I kind of teased last episode, that I finally have an online merch store up and running. Well, that's official. So anybody who wants to pick up your officially licensed Picky Fingers t-shirts or stickers, please head to banjopodcast.com. Visit the store there, and I've already seen some photos floating around of some of the guests on this podcast. Ned and Greg Cahill and Mike Sumner and a bunch of others. They all have their t-shirts, and they're looking pretty darn good. So if you want to look and sound like the pros, that's what you got to do, is head over to banjopodcast.com and check that out. Another way to distinguish yourself amongst your peers is to head over to patreon.com/banjopodcast. That's the way to make a monthly donation to directly support the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. It's available for free, of course, but it's not free to create, and it does take a lot of time. So I greatly, greatly appreciate everyone who's visited that site and helped me out on there. And in fact, today, as always, we have a very special patron to give a shout out on the show. He is a banjo player known only as Greg. So in the long line of amazing celebrities, Prince, Madonna, Beyonce, and now we have Greg. Greg, thank you so much for your support. He was taking Skype lessons from Davy Jones, which I always love to hear about people who are interacting with past guests of the podcast. Just makes me feel like we have a nice, tight-knit community, and I know that that's true. So, Greg, thank you so much again. Once again, for all the rest of you, patreon.com/banjopodcast is how you check that out. You can also get a hold of me via email with any of your questions, comments, suggestions, concerns. That email address is pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Love hearing from all of you there. Track me down on social media. On Instagram, I can be found picky_fingers. Follow me on Twitter. I'm at Banjo Podcast. And if you are on Facebook, there's actually a special group just for listeners of the show to discuss banjo things and related items. And if you search for the group called Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast, listeners, fans, and friends, just ask to be a member of that. And I pretty much accept everybody. So we can all communicate about more banjo things, because what else is there to talk about these days? So yeah, hope to see you all on one of those platforms. And that's the way to keep in touch.
All just to get to you. I ran too hard, I played too rough, I gave my love not near enough. I bled too red and cried too blue, beat my fist up against the moon, all just to get to you.
Today's freshly picked episode features the album called Primetime by the trio Crary, Evans, and Barnick, featuring, of course, banjo player Bill Evans, who you all know from everywhere. He's Bill Evans. You all know him, and he was also profiled back in episode 19. But he returns to talk about this new release featuring him, as well as guitar legend Dan Crary, and also the prolific California-based bass player and singer Wally Barnick. Really, there's not much more I'm going to say about it. Bill Evans is always a fantastic communicator and presenter, and always very gracious in his praise for his bandmates, which he does here. So I hope you all enjoy this conversation with Bill, and if you came for the banjo music, I hope you stay for the pleasant and very mood-enhancing wind chimes in the back of his New Mexico home. They creep in there in the background of the interview, which is really nice. It's nice and relaxing. So check all that out. Check out the new album, and take it away, Bill Evans. Well, hey, first of all, it's great to see you. I missed you at, were you supposed to be at Banjo Camp this year, I think?
Oh, I'm always supposed to be at Banjo Camp. I was so lucky to get booked at all of these events, but as we know, they've all been canceled here. So I was going to be there, and I would have seen you, but didn't happen.
Yeah, well, disappointed about that, of course, but glad we could touch base. Do you have anything to report regarding your fame and riches that have happened to you since your first appearance on the podcast? I'm sure that happened as a direct result, right?
I have heard from so many people who listened to that, and we got kind of emotional and talked about life as much as we talked about banjo. And a lot of folks are out there listening to you, Keith, and I got such tremendous feedback from from a lot of people saying that they had heard it and it was inspirational to them. And I know we kind of went on the deep end, and I guess one can still listen to that podcast also, right? And
oh, of course, yeah, they're all still there, yeah.
And so it was a joy. A lot of things have changed since that time. I've married a wonderful gal who plays banjo. Her name is Barbara. Nickname is Babby, and she's got a couple albums out with her band. And she's a really creative player. And we're playing a lot of music together, especially since the shutdown. And I moved to New Mexico, and so I moved from the San Francisco Bay Area with its millions of people to an area in New Mexico where I have to drive 2 to 3 hours to get to the closest airport.
Wow!
And
what a change of pace for you. That's crazy.
And 6 miles to the post office, 10 miles to the grocery store. But it's beautiful out here, and I'm at 6,500 feet near the town of Ruidoso. We get 4 seasons. It's nice. It's great. And, in this time of shutdown, I'm doing a lot of things online, like a lot of people, and feeling blessed, really, just feeling lucky.
Good. Yeah, I can tell just by your demeanor that it's a welcome change. You're not missing the hubbub too greatly, it seems like.
No. And I think in many ways, just given the way that my career direction has gone, including a focus on teaching, that I was kind of ready for this. And so, good. I'm putting more emphasis in the online lessons at Peghead Nation, and I'm doing a lot of teaching one-on-one online. And then also something that I just decided to do really early on is I've got 4 workshops up and running that are now on YouTube. And you could just enter Bill Evans Banjo and you'll get to the channel. They're absolutely free. And they're 75 minutes to an hour and a half long on topics that I would teach at a place like the Midwest Banjo Camp on Scruggs Backup, working up solos, understanding melodic style. We even did a bluegrass trio vocal harmony workshop with my daughter and my wife. And those have been watched by thousands of folks, and that just makes me feel good that I can, reach people at this time. And, I think the whole point is to still find ways to let music bring us joy. And we can't necessarily be in the same room together, but through these workshops, I feel like I'm trying to do what I can at any rate, just as you do what you can with the Picky Fingers podcast.
Yeah, I sure am, and I've seen all those things that you're posting. You put those out there on on social media and stuff. And it is kind of ironic, right, that in the middle of a shutdown, we're almost in a golden age of online access to living room concerts of people who you're thousands of miles away from, and you wouldn't be able to see them play live in your hometown, except now you can, and it's on a screen, and it's a little different, but in a way it's, I don't know, like I said, it's sort of a paradox that we're shut down in one way, but in another way we're opened up even more.
Right. And from the presenter perspective, and I know that maybe you experienced this too, we're all kind of like the blind leading the blind and trying to figure out how to do this in the best way. And I'm still learning as I go. And I've been very lucky in that, I have not had severe problems yet. And I put a lot of energy and work into those, and I needed to take some time off. But I anticipate getting started with those online sessions again. I usually do them on my Facebook page as Facebook Live events, and then I move them to YouTube about a week later, where they're easier to find. And then another thing, I'm hoping that we'll get back to events next year, and I think it's too soon to tell. We have an incredible living situation here in New Mexico. Where we call it the banjo compound. I have to change that name. That's a little bit too militaristic. But we've got room to have guests here, and we've got plenty of space to social distance. A big deck overlooking the mountains. Lots of spaces where, if we were to do a small event of up to 5 students, everybody could spread out. And practice, and I could go, and we could even have sessions together on a huge porch outside. So we're gearing up towards maybe trying some of that in the fall, just depending upon how the virus is spreading and where we are, in terms of that in the fall. And I think it's just impossible to tell. And in the meantime, I'm working on 3 books, and I've got a Banjo in America DVD that's set to come out soon. And
of one of the live performances?
Well, there's this wonderful guy named David Bragger who has Tiki Parlor recordings in Los Angeles, and he does these incredible videos of old-time artists. And in the 90s, he played rock and roll and worked for MTV. And then
that's funny.
And I love these crazy stories, though. He convinced, being in Hollywood or being in Los Angeles, he convinced one of these television shows that do home makeovers to come into one of his rooms and totally remake the room as a tiki parlor. So he's got this leather couch and all. It's a great set. And if you just go on YouTube and enter old time tiki parlor, he's recorded dozens of old time musicians. And I convinced him to do a Banjo in America, and we recorded it in May of 2019. I did 19 songs on 11 banjos, and we just haven't put it out yet. But it'll be available.
That's cool.
It'll be available as a DVD set, CD in one, and that's ready to go. And I'm also about 3/4 of the way through another bluegrass album of mostly original instrumentals. It got interrupted with the isolation and the inability to get everybody in a studio, but that's going too. So I guess
how exciting!
I guess I'm pretty busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it in creative ways too, which is.
I'm excited about the books. I'm writing. Kristen Scott Benson is doing stuff for Hal Leonard, and she did a great beginning banjo book, and she is part of their 25 great blank solos series. And so in this case, it's 25 great banjo solos. And she made it halfway through, and she asked me to come and take up the rest of the book. And so we'll have profiles and interviews with players who have passed and players who are still around, with a sample tab and a recording. And that book is going to be out next year. I'm working on that. I'm working on an exercise book, kind of like a Patterns for Jazz kind of book. That's a long-term project. And the third book I can't remember right now. It'll come back to me. But I wake up and
I hope it does.
I wake up and I look at the long list of things that I have to do, and I try to do a little bit on each of them. And then you see this Keith guy wanting you to figure out technology and how to record, and it becomes apparent you're not going to get anything done this afternoon. Oh no, it's fine. And speaking of, the current moment we're in. And I have this new album with Dan Crary and Wally Barnick, and we can kind of shift over to that. Of course, I'm discovering that not all the young folks know who Dan Crary even is. And of course, for you and I'm older than you, I have a feeling. Dan Crary was an incredibly important guitar player back in the 70s. One of the first guys to ever, flat pick lead guitars for fiddle tunes ever. And he was the first person who called me. We had done a tour of the Northwest in late January, small house concert kinds of situations, and we all got home. Dan lives in Placerville, California. Our bass player, Wally Barnick, lives in the San Luis Obispo area of California, beautiful Central Coast, and I'm in Ruidoso, New Mexico. And Dan called me shortly after we all got home after the tours, early February, and he was like saying, man, this virus that we're hearing about from China, I think is going to affect us. And sure enough, and if we can all put ourselves back in that time, remember how things were moving so fast? It was like every day the world seemed different. And so we've canceled all the tours, all the touring that we had. But we still got this new record out and trying to find ways to spread the word about that. And I more or less produced the record for the trio. And I wanted to really feature Dan. He turned 80 years old in 2019, which is an amazing accomplishment that he's still playing and sounding so great. And Dan is really wonderful arranger. He's very eclectic in terms of his musical taste. And I feel like as we were getting into the CD, I think we were all surprised. It turned out better than we thought it would.
Well, that's a great feeling to have. And to your point about people not knowing who Dan Crary is, I won't forget my first time seeing him, because I was in a young band and we had gotten a showcase slot for the National Folk Alliance down in Nashville that year. So it was kind of a big deal for us, and we're going down there, a lot of anticipation. And who is playing before us at our big anticipated showcase but Crary and Beppe Gambetta, when they were doing that duo, and of course just brought the house down, and you could just hear the oxygen being sucked out as we walk onto the stage. It was a little bit of a humbling experience to see those guys and have to go on right after them. So I won't forget that, but yeah, he left an impression for sure.
Yeah, we've all been there. I was in a band called Cloud Valley in the 1980s with Missy Raines on bass, who of course has moved on to many exciting things. And I used to refer to the breeze created by the folding of lawn chairs when we would go on stage for our festival set. It would kind of blow our hair back. People actively leaving. But no, Dan's wonderful.
Very visceral. Yeah.
Yeah. And one reason why I think that Dan is he's never promoted himself, very much. And also he decided to have a income earning career as a professor in communications, and he worked at Cal State in Northridge. And so he wasn't actively touring beyond a certain point. At that point in time when he was touring with Byron Berline and John Hickman, that was really stretching his schedule. And then when that kind of rode its course, he spent a good 10 or 15 years not playing all that actively. And of course, things change. If you're off the scene, people are, become not aware of you. But gosh, those Rounder albums, that Rounder album he did with Courtney Johnson and Sam Bush, terrific. And the Bluegrass Guitar record, to my knowledge, it's either the first or second full album of fiddle tunes played on flat pick guitar style. Eric Thompson, the Bay Area guitar player, might have the award for being the very first, but Dan's record might be the first two, or they're neck and neck, first and second. That would have been back in like '68. So
that's how far back. It's definitely one of those rite of passage recordings for bluegrass guitarists at this point.
Yeah.
So going back to steering us back to the new album, that's kind of the whole point of why I tricked you into talking to me and everything. You mentioned it's for his 80th birthday. Now, was that a coincidence that gets released and you get to kind of embrace that it was his 80th, or was that a consideration in, we need to get this guy back in the studio, he's 80, and capture what we can of the talent that he still has?
Right. I don't think that we were aware of the milestone until we were into it. And the recording represents about 2 years of sessions. So it took a while we didn't go into the studio for a week and then come out with a full record. We had started working on it. And then I realized, hey, Dan is turning 80. This is a big, big deal. And hence the title, Primetime. That's not a very unusual title, and it could mean a number of things. Dan has a tradition of calling albums giving albums ambiguous titles that are pretty interesting. And so he liked that title as far as it went. And so Primetime meaning, hey, this is a special milestone in Dan's life. Also, he's sounding really, really good, so we're catching him in a prime of sorts. And the trio was sounding really good too. And it's. I think that Wally and I viewed this as a way to really pay special tribute to Dan. I'm not sure that he saw it that way. He was just,
But it worked out one way or another.
Yeah.
Well, talk about that. I mean, I've seen you play in a lot of different configurations, but I imagine playing in a trio like that is quite a bit of an adjustment from, I don't know, your typical bluegrass band. Talk about how that changes, how you have to change your playing to adapt to that, and just what that involved for you.
Great question. We do have a mandolin on several of those cuts, and so that more or less gives us a traditional bluegrass band context in terms of the rhythmic rolls of each instrument. What I realized when I first got into this, Steve Spurgeon was the bass player, and everybody knows Steve Spurgeon from the band California, and he wrote "Walk in the Irish Rain." Well-known musician, especially on the West Coast, singer-songwriter, and he left the group. But I was not really intimidated, but I didn't want to screw up. I'll put it that way, because on the West Coast, Steve and Dan are important people. I quickly realized in just a couple of rehearsals in, Dan, because of the years that he spent playing with Byron Berline and John Hickman, and he also plays solo as well, and touring with Beppe, he has a very orchestral rhythmic sound. And the guitar, he's a big man. The friggin' Taylor guitar is really big. It's like an overgrown dreadnought size guitar, the Dan Crary model. And oftentimes he's retuning to grab that low string because, if we're in the key of D, for instance, you lower the guitar sixth string from E to D. Very common kind of thing that people will do. And then his whole rhythmic approach, even for a bluegrass song, is pretty orchestral in terms of the chord voicings and stuff. And so he ended up taking a lot more room than a regular bluegrass rhythm guitar player would do. And so ironically enough, it gave me room to feel more comfortable. Huh. And so when we're in a trio context, depending upon the material, because it's not all bluegrass, I think I gave a good deal of thought as to how I was going to treat things rhythmically. So we do John Hyatt's tune, Memphis in the Meantime, and that's a funky kind of thing. So I had to kind of, come up with a different kind of backing and then keep in mind what Dan was doing on guitar and bass. So if anything, it allowed me to explore different ways to come up with accompaniment where if the band had been bigger, it would have been more limiting. And I might have fallen back on the bluegrass, the tried and true bluegrass banjo, roll pattern, throughout, that kind of thing. And there's a good bunch of that as well. And then in many cases, through the sheer act of rehearsing material and playing it live, in some cases for a couple of years, he would do kind of predictable things with connecting chords and stuff. Again, he's a very skilled accompanist that adds this orchestral feel. So I could imitate that. So there's a song, or not imitate, I played with him, basically. He would do the chord voicings. I knew that he was going to do them again, so I would do them as well.
It could be part of the arrangement at that point.
Exactly. It gets a little more arranged. And that's a natural thing rather than just sitting down and, let's try to come up with something interesting. I would just listen to what he would do and then try to match that. And you can hear that on tracks like Memphis in the Meantime, Sonny's Dream, everything, actually. Even 2020 Vision, which kicks off the album, which is Dan's remake of the Jimmy Martin Waltz Time song. He puts it in 4/4 and he adds a lot of rock and roll chords. And so I was just following those chords.
They say that she's wicked and maybe it's true, but there's one thing that I do know, she's no longer mine. 20/20 vision and walking round blind.
just couldn't love her the way that I...
So, yeah.
That's really interesting that you're focusing on his orchestral type of vibe, because I found myself often while listening to it being reminded of like a Kruger Brothers sound. And I had chalked it up to being like the same instrumentation, and you guys all kind of have baritone sounding voices. And I kind of thought that must be why I was thinking that, but I think that's probably another aspect of it, is to the extent that he does sound orchestral, that is an aspect also that the Kruger Brothers embrace. And so, I don't know, that makes even more sense to me, I guess, to hear you say that.
Yeah, and, Kruger Brothers are incredible. I'm not even sure that Dan has heard them, I mean, not being critical of Dan or the Kruger Brothers, and Dan likes to listen to classical guitar music and early music, so Renaissance, medieval music.
Interesting.
And so that's where that comes from. But yeah definitely, you have to kind of figure out what to do. And another important aspect: both Steve Spurgeon and Wally Barnick play electric bass, and electric bass is kind of not seen so much anymore in bluegrass bands, and that is a different sound. You get more sustain, and so that it's like, whew, man, it gives a banjo player a break, because you can do more things. And my own approach has always. This isn't going to be very profound. It's always been chordal, and so when I teach something like this, and I bet you get to a certain level when you're playing, and I think we all think about our playing in this way. But a particular key generates a whole set of positions that aren't just G, C, and D. And so if you start exploring minor keys, you've got different ways of expressing those minor keys depending upon what the mode is. We played Little Sadie, for instance, which has been a staple of Dan's repertoire for decades, learned from Doc Watson, and that's kind of a different scale than Jerusalem Ridge or something, but it's all minor. Yeah. And so there's a whole, you start thinking about passing chords. For instance, you look at the basic chord progression. How can I get from one chord to the other? And a lot of times Dan will lead me in that, and so I can relate to what he's doing. And sometimes I will create something that he'll grab onto as well. A great example of that actually is really one of my favorite performances on the album is a medley, and the first one is Dan all by himself, and he's performing this song called "Rattlin' Roaring Willie."
Yeah.
And the lyric is from Robert Burns, as I understand it. The melody is from the Irish singer Dick Galgan. I might be mispronouncing that. And Dan toured Ireland many times, toured the UK, knew Dick. And this lyric is about a fiddler who likes to play fiddle so much that, and drink as well, that his drinking got him into such trouble that he had to pawn his fiddle. So, typical lyric that happens all the time, right? And,
I feel like I know a few of those people, yeah.
Exactly. And then we tagged on to the end of that just because I had this instrumental written and we didn't know where else to put it. So I wrote a song called Winston's Jig a number of years ago, and we tagged that on the end. And if you listen to that track, Dan plays a great counterpoint to what I'm doing. And this just, again, explores his own, classical inclinations, and he created a great track and raised the interest level over and above what I was doing.
There's also a big focus on the three of you singing together. And I guess, I don't know, I've never seen you shy away from singing, but I don't know that I've ever heard you showcased or contribute quite to the level that you do on the recording. Talk about that. Is that something you've tried to cultivate in yourself, or maybe I've just not noticed that you've always been doing that?
Thanks for noticing that. I've always sung, and I, instead of taking band in school, I took choir, and then I took madrigal singing in high school, and we toured all over the state. And I've always sung. There have been particular situations that I've been in where I was in bands that had singers that, for lack of a better way to express it, sounded more bluegrass than I did. So it would have been silly for me to sing any lead in Dry Branch Fire Squad at all. That would have upset the whole vibe of the whole thing. And then even in California, I was lucky to be in bands with really, really great singers, and those individuals, be they male or female, really devoted a lot of energy to their singing, where I just sort of sing. But last several years, I have sung more. And with Dan and Wally, they were insistent that I was singing. And the one song that I really sing lead in from beginning to end is the bluegrass favorite that most folks are familiar with, called I'll Remember You, Love, in My Prayers.
Yeah.
And we've either done something wonderful or we've completely butchered it, depending upon one's taste. But I always liked the Ralph Stanley version. That was on the first LP that I ever heard back in the 1970s, or second LP. And Dan came up with, he said, I want you to sing this lower, and then I think together we added the other chords, and really changed the song. I still like singing it bluegrass style, and so depending upon the context, I'll just let it go that way. I think I've done that on the stage at the Midwest Banjo Camp some year, but yeah, it really changed the song. And then we started, working on harmonies, and things got kind of, working on suspensions and, appoggiaturas, whatever those things are called, and creating fancy harmony. And, you got to be really careful, because you're making a bluegrass record and you don't want it to sound too precious. And I certainly have been guilty of creating a lot of precious music in my time. And so we were all kind of wary of that. But then we went with it. We went with what felt good.
Go where you will, on land or on sea, I'll share all your sorrows and cares. And at night when I kneel by my bedside to pray, I'll remember you, love, in my prayer.
And then the harmony singing, I ended up singing the highest range of anybody in the band. And that's been kind of the result of the fact that, when I was back in California, I had a monthly gig with some great musicians, Jim Nunnally, Chad Manning, Tom Beckany, and Steve Potier, who are all well-known California musicians, at a pub. We called it Bangers and Grass because of the English theme of the pub. And we never had a rehearsal. We played for 8 years in a row, almost every month, just taking requests. Of course, you end up playing the same things over and over again. Well, Jim Nunnally has a pretty high voice anyway, and you can hear him with the Nell and Jim band these days. And I would have to sing tenor above him, and I just the result of doing that at least once a month increased my vocal range.
Just kind of stretched it up there a little bit.
It did, and of course we haven't sung and played together lately. So if we were to do that again, I might be back down into more of my not so high tenor range. But that helped too. And then when I was able to go into these recordings with Dan and Wally, I sang higher than I thought that I could sing.
Hey, sorry to interrupt everybody, but I just couldn't resist an opportunity to tell you about the world's most trusted source for new, used, and vintage fretted instruments, and that, of course, is Elderly Instruments, which is a family-owned business located in Lansing, Michigan. But if you're not in Lansing, that's okay. They ship worldwide, too, and they just have a vast selection of acoustic guitars, electric guitars, ukuleles, mandolins, all the accessories and books that you'd want for either of those, and of course, plenty and plenty of banjos. And something that people don't often think about when you're buying stuff like that, particularly entry-level instruments, is the fact that they have a world-renowned repair shop as well. When all those instruments come into the store, if they do not pass a thorough setup and inspection by the repair shop, they get sent back, and that sometimes angers the suppliers of elderly instruments, but it lets you know that Elderly stands by their products, and they also have a helpful and knowledgeable sales staff to help you find what you need, and you can be confident that you're going to get something that is set up to Elderly's high quality standards. So if that sounds great, and I know it does, check them out at elderly.com or call 517-372-7880 to speak to one of their helpful salespeople. It's where I go, and it's where you should go too. The Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast is also proud to be sponsored by Peghead Nation. With Peghead Nation's streaming video courses, perfect for quarantine by the way, but they have courses in banjo, guitar, mandolin, fiddle, dobro, upright bass, and ukulele. You can learn bluegrass, old time, and plenty of other styles from some of the most talented players and instructors in roots music. For example, listen to some of the courses. These are just the banjo courses that they offer. A couple different classes with Bill Evans, such as beginning banjo and bluegrass banjo. You can learn clawhammer banjo with Evie Layden, Wade Ward style banjo with Bruce Molsky, the banjo according to Danny Barnes, and also contemporary bluegrass banjo with Wesley Corbett. And each of those courses includes high-quality multi-angle video lessons, downloadable notation and tab, play-along tracks, and plenty of tunes and songs to play. So it's everything you need to up your skills, especially in these isolated times. And listen up, because this is the best part. If you join any of Peghead Nation's video courses now, you're going to get your first month free by going to pegheadnation.com and use the promo code PickyFingers at checkout. That's Picky Fingers, all one word, all lowercase, at pegheadnation.com. Check it out. Let's go back to your original compositions. There's two of them. You already mentioned the jig. And typically, if you tell someone that you're contributing a couple banjo tunes to an album, they're going to expect sled riding or something like that. And you wrote a jig, and then also your other one, Road to Ruidoso. I was going to ask what Ruidoso was. You've already explained what that is. That's your new hometown in New Mexico. So that answers that. But that, while it's not a particularly slow piece, it is a little more of a moody piece rather than hard driving, whatever you want to call it. It's not sled riding.
It is not sled riding, although we have a ski resort up here.
Yeah, close enough.
just for the record. It was a tune that was written during the period in which my life was transitioning to New Mexico, and it captured in a musical feeling what I was experiencing, which, it's hard to convince anyone listening to a piece of banjo music that it could be, representative of some kind of radical change in emotions and revelations in life. But I was just trying to do that musically. It's in the key of F, which is, beautiful key that I first heard Alan Mundy play Darcy Farrow in years ago. Although Earl played a lot of cool things in F without a capo too, by the way. And the tune, I've also recorded the tune for my own record, and the album may end up being called Road to Ruidoso. But
this is
I
the
wanted
one that's
Dan
in progress that you mentioned before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the other version that was going to be on my record got recorded first. And since it seemed like this record with Dan was going to come out sooner, I knew that Dan would have a really great, he'd play it really well because it fits in with his concept of this orchestral kind of feel to the guitar. And so it worked. It worked really well. And it is kind of a medium tempo piece, 3 sections, a little bit crooked, so it drives people crazy when I put a chord chart in front of them and I say, no, second ending, go there, no, skip that line, now go back. But
there's minor chords. What are you trying to do here?
Hey, here's the thing, all you banjo players. If you want to create something that you think is original, just do a 1-4-5, but let the 5 be minor.
Ooh.
Just try it sometime.
Interesting.
So G, C, D minor. Suddenly, it opens up the door to something that sounds like you're opening up, some box of huge musical meaning. And that's how that tune started, and the rest of it just went out from there. Always kind of with the mind of making it sound like something that could relate to bluegrass. So maybe there's a little bit of Bill Monroe, ideas in there. The challenge for me with the piece, I don't view myself as a great improviser, especially in the studio, because I'm not in there. I'm not in the studio that much. And so I cut it twice, so I had to come up with two different things to play for the improv.
Interesting.
Which for me is like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? But when the other record does come out, I play something completely different. Play a different banjo too, but on it. But yeah, I love playing that tune, and my writing has been moving in that direction. So when this other new record comes out, it's going to be perhaps really boring. It's a lot of mid-tempo pieces with a lot of sections, and that are kind of ruminative in a way. And there's one or two breakdown kinds of things. And then I'm going to sing a tune on it with my wife. So,
I'm looking forward to it. And
thank you.
And there's not really like an estimated date on that. It sounds like it's just going to kind of depend on circumstances.
Sooner rather than later, because I just got to get back into the Bay Area and get everybody in that studio. Those are two big, huge things, because the studio is currently shut down. And got to get John Reichman down from Canada, which is another thing. And then just have 3 songs left and we'll be done. We've got like 33 minutes already recorded. So that's already, kind of approaching an album length. A lot of double fiddles on it, which is cool. I'd never done that before.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And one more thing to relate to the Road to Ruidoso song in terms of the album. There is another instrumental on the album, which is Crazy Creek, which is kind of insane because Dan chose to play the 12-string guitar on it. And there is a tradition of that in country music. And I'll give you listeners 5 seconds to think about this. This is like, it could be a Jeopardy question. Dun, 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 dun. The other person that played 12-string lead guitar in our music is Glenn Campbell, who actually was an incredible lead guitar player. And he was a studio musician before he became famous. And he played 12-string leads on a lot of things. And Dan has always been interested in trying to play these fiddle tunes on 12-string guitar, which is what he did on Crazy Creek. And of course, that tune, if you've played it, I know a lot of you have played it, it's crazy. And so that was our more faster tempo instrumental there. So we could balance it with Road to Ruidoso and not be entirely apologetic.
Yeah, definitely. And you added a little bit of a cool arrangement even to Crazy Creek, if I remember right. There's a little bit of a It's a descending figure in fourths that's maybe from a Miles Davis record that Steve Spurgeon had found somewhere. And Dan is going to go for something like that all the time to throw that in. Cool.
Yeah. Oh, and then there is another counter melody this is way too mumuch information, that appears about 3/4 of the way through the song that sounds like Crazy Creek. So if you've never heard the song before, you wouldn't even necessarily be aware that, we were playing a different song. And that was Dan, too. He wrote the chords, he wrote the melody, and he'd been playing this for a number of years. Before I joined the trio, the mandolin and fiddler Martin Stevens, a young man from Portland, Oregon, had been playing with Dan a little bit, and Martin had learned that part. And so I had to go back and learn that whole thing, and it took me a while to get it right.
Cool.
Yeah. It's all Dan, man. I mean, he's amazing. And the gospel medley that ends the record is very unusual. It starts off with 2 shape note hymns, which is fiddle and banjo just beginning. And then we do the Stanley Brothers, which has a deep connection for Dan because he started listening to the Stanley Brothers in the early 1950s. He was a DJ in Kansas.
Oh, really?
Playing bluegrass and country records as a college student. That was his college job. And then we ended with another kind of early American song that Dan arranged, with polyphony. Polyphony means that the singers don't sing the same thing at the same time. And we don't hear that very often in bluegrass music. So that was all Dan, too, that whole thing. And that turned out, it's different, and it turned out really well.
We shall resurrection morning, when those prison bars are broken, we shall rise, we shall rise, we shall rise, we shall rise, we shall resurrection morning, when those prison bars are broken, we shall rise, we shall rise, we shall rise, we shall resurrection morning, when those prison bars are broken, we shall rise.
Dan actually arranged the vocals on that?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and
that's a cool tune.
Yeah, thank you. And there are moments where, the easiest way to communicate to somebody is to actually write it out in musical notation, which he did. And then we had to learn how to read the notation. I actually knew how to read it, but it came close. Yeah, and that's how we rehearsed it, is from the notation, and then we got it. Very interesting stuff, and from the mind of Dan Crary. Very interesting guy. And again, because he wasn't a professional, full-time professional musician out there touring, there's a lot there that people aren't aware of. And hopefully this album reveals some of that.
Yeah, I hope so too. Now, I'm not familiar enough with Wally or Dan's singing to parse out who's doing the lead vocals on some of these. Who are the singers, like, I don't know, for example, All Just to Get to You. Is that Wally singing that, or is that...
Wally Barnick has kind of the warmer country voice, so he's singing Sonny's Dream and All Just to Get to You, the Joe Ely song. And Dan has the lower voice. He's singing 20/20 Vision, Memphis in the Meantime, Rattlin' Roarin' Willie.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Dan has always sung, with Dan Crary and Hickman and his own records. He's done lots of singing. So his voice will be likely familiar to a lot of folks. Wally, again, is well known in California. California scene tends to be, kind of have its own energy in lots of ways. But because it costs a lot of money to get a band on an airplane and fly them somewhere, we tend to sometimes groups stay in California quite a bit. But the Cache Valley Drifters, kind of a really well-known group. I remember in college buying the Cache Valley Drifters Flying Fish record with the song White Room. That was their big hit. The Cream's
the cover.
Room.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've been around forever. And he still plays bass. They're now a trio, and he still plays with them. And wonderful singer. It's interesting when you get into a band. Wally turned 70, and he was in the Navy and served in Vietnam for 2 years in 1968 and 69 on those pontoon boats that went up the Mekong Delta. And so this is like what is covered in the Apocalypse Now and those movies. And one cannot imagine a more terrible situation, And it's just interesting. I kept, I think about, I was too young to serve. I didn't serve. A lot of the young people that I know, of course, none of us have lived in wartime in that way. Some of us have been to the Middle East conflicts and stuff. But what am I trying to say here? By the time you get 60 or 70 or 80, you've lived a life. and what you've learned in that life could be important to someone who's younger, who might not think about it otherwise. And so the Bluegrass Situation did a profile of the band, and I was very excited because, we were more than twice the median age of the typical subject matter of the Bluegrass Situation. Yeah. And so as they were asking us questions, Dan and Wally were saying, oh, God, what are we going to say? How do we answer this? And I just said to Wally, I want the readers to know about your service in Vietnam at some point. And so he and you can go to that article and take a look at it, but one of the questions was, how did you get into music? And he said, well, I spent 2 years going up in these, pontoon boats in the Mekong Delta. And the footnote that he didn't mention was that, people were dying almost every day, on one side or the other. And one of the guys had a turntable back at the base and would order albums, but it was like The Doors.
Yeah.
And Sly and the Family. It was kind of the heavier end of the late 60s stuff. And then he came out of the Vietnam War saying, I want to play music. Music will be my refuge. Very interesting stuff for us all to think about, on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
So Wally is a great guy. Wally's a great guy, really warm vocalist. And he makes his living kind of as a lounge lizard on all those Central California bars and restaurants. And even though we're in shutdown, even California, he's gigging 5 days a week right now. And we're recording this in late June at these outdoor restaurants with social distancing and stuff. And he carries a big book about 5 inches thick, and he's got an amplifier and that carries his vocal and and a Takamine guitar or something. And if somebody says low rent rendezvous, he goes to L and then a low rent rendezvous.
And he's got it.
Yeah. His repertoire is large, and so he brought the Joe Ely tune to the band. He's brought a lot of things to the band that he thought we could do, and Dan and I were like, we want to be really careful converting these rock and roll songs, and we did Seven Bridges Road, which is like that might be a big offense enough as it is, and because there's a long tradition of bluegrass bands doing rock songs, and maybe that's worn itself out a little bit. But they ended up sounding good for us, both of them, and so we included them. So Wally is a kick to work with, and he's got a beautiful wife, 5 kids, innumerable grandchildren, and he's living the life on the Central California coast. Man, it's beautiful there.
Sounds like
it's incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great. A little bit warmer than the Bay Area year round, but not as hot as the interior. And it's vacation land. People come from all over the world, and there's wine country there.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if that's where we were talking is by the wine.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to travel, and he gets to play 5 days a week.
Well,
so
I'm glad
more power to him.
I'm glad he's hanging in there. It sounds like that's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, so
cool.
So another cool aspect of the more sparse instrumentation is that we get to hear a little more of the subtlety and the tone of your banjo. What banjos were you using? Banjos were you using for this recording, and what else can you say about the sound you were able to capture?
Yeah, thank you. I used what has been my main banjo for the last 12 years, which is a 1930 flathead Granada. It left the factory as a flathead. It was a tenor, and it was a banjo that I had acquired from Sonny Osborne, and it's been my main instrument since then. And I've tried different necks on it, and so for that, at that particular time, I think the first sessions I had a maple neck on it, the setup that it's had all along, and about midway through the sessions, I put a mahogany neck on it. Earl Scruggs had a mahogany neck on his Granada for a good many years in the late 50s and early 60s. When you're listening to Foggy Mountain Banjo, it is said Earl had a mahogany neck, and a lot of those early. The 60s era, around the time of the Ballad of Jed Clampett recording, that's a mahogany neck, supposedly. I may not be. There are others that know more details on this than I do. I love the sound of Earl's banjo from that period. Yeah. The playing may not be as fiery as it has been in other points in his career, but the sound of the instruments, very well recorded. Bob Johnston was the producer for a lot of those Flatt and Scruggs records, an African-American guy who also just happened to produce Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. I just had to say that. Very interesting.
I had no idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, check that out.
That.
Open up your open up your Bear Family box set and you see the word Bob, see the producer Bob Johnston, and he recorded Bringing It All Back Home and, a couple of those Dylan albums. But at any rate, when Dylan was in Nashville, Bob Johnston was the producer, which I think is just awesome. And so the mahogany sound gives it a little more of a direct kind of in-your-face sound. It's so difficult to explain how these differences work, where the maple is more bell-like. Yeah. It's the only thing I can say. And it's a different sound for me. The banjo sounds different on this record than it does on say, the In Good Company record. And only used one microphone. I don't get too bent out of shape about studio things. I probably need to learn more than I do know about it. I don't take my Neumann microphones in there because I don't own any. But we used a great studio in Cambria, California called Painted Sky, and this guy has worked with everybody from members of the Eagles to Linda Ronstadt, a lot of California acts, and I got to have my input as to what I wanted it to sound like. And when it comes to mixing, we're always trying to boost the banjo up. Of course. You work with these rock guys, and they, the terminology that someone will use is coloring vehicle, which means we're going to turn it down where you can hardly hear it. But we kept boosting it, and I was always saying, don't EQ it, no echo, no reverb, don't do anything. And so we managed to win those battles most of the time, all the way through mastering. And I'm really happy with the sound of the banjo on that record. Since then, I've put another maple neck on it. I just like to play around with it. And Charlie Cushman is my guru in this. If you have an old Gibson banjo and you want to take it to the most maximum sound that it can possibly give you, I just recommend leaving it with Charlie Cushman for a couple of days. And in regard to this Granada, it's been a long-term project. I've been taking this banjo to him once every year for the last 3 or 4 years. And every single time it sounds better.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. I wake up every morning wanting to play that particular banjo. I'm blessed to have other old banjos in the house now, but that one's still my go-to record or go-to instrument. Now, on my solo record that'll be coming out hopefully, before too long, I actually used another Granada that I own that has a Blaylock ring in it, but otherwise it's a 1930s pot, and it was owned by Jim Rollins, who was a really well-beloved person in the pre-war Gibson banjo community. He lived in South Carolina. He was an engineer. He owned a lot of great banjos. And he would show up at banjo gatherings and festivals, and he was a good Crow-style player. And I was lucky. I knew him. He was a friend, and I was lucky to get his Granada when Charlie Cushman was liquidating the estate for Jim Rollins' family, and that banjo is also incredible, really, really great. And so on the new record that's coming out, it's that banjo, and it has a real different. Well,
that'll be fun,
so.
Just as a scientific banjo exercise to hear all these.
Yeah.
And I think that's it for my notes, Bill. Is there any other particular highlights of the album that you felt you really wanted to point out or share, or maybe aspects, certain songs that you're particularly proud of that you want to point people toward? Or
thanks, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this interview and tell people about the album. Again, it's called Prime Time. One can go to my website, BillEvansBanjo.com, and purchase a hard copy to help us repay the debt that we will owe for the rest of our lives on the making of the record. But you can also listen to Apple Music, Spotify, all the usual sources. I would just say listen to Dan, man. The thing that makes me happiest about the record is that Dan sounds great. And I'm real happy with what I did. I was just trying to play along in a way that was appropriate to what everybody else was doing. Dan just blew me away on the record. Yeah,
well, I think it achieved that goal in both senses of highlighting Dan, and I think you did a good job of doing your job and giving him some tasty sounding banjo to play over. It's really enjoyable.
Thank you.
You stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask where people can go to find it, and you stole my thunder. So. Yeah, highly recommended, and I hope you keep hanging in there. Sounds like you're doing good, and I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
Same to you. Same to you, and same to all your listeners as well. Hang in there. Let's think about how great it's going to feel to make music on the other side. It's going to be great.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
And thank you again for keeping this podcast going strong. It's been a great thing to get to know so many great players and get so much inspiration from all these people out there who are playing banjo.
I don't know if anyone's as inspired by it as I am, so it's my pleasure. But I appreciate your kind words.
You're welcome. I hope to see you in Michigan. If not this fall, for the Great Lakes Music Camp, maybe at the Midwest Banjo Camp next year. Yeah. Sure. Thank you, Keith. Take care, man. And I hope, give Primetime a listen, everybody. Hope you enjoy it.
Appreciate it. And there you have it. That's going to do it for this freshly picked episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. You heard a bunch of sound clips, and if you like what you heard, you really need to check out that album that Bill and I have been talking about for the last hour. That's Primetime by Crary, Evans, and Barnick. Once again, thank you to Greg, the Patreon supporter of today's podcast. Go to patreon.com/banjo podcast to find out how you can support the show. And another way to support the show is please buy t-shirts, banjopodcast.com. Go to the shop there. Other than that, get a hold of me at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. And that's going to do it for now. I'll be back soon with another episode. Not sure yet if it's going to be an interview or a lesson or another freshly picked series, but I'll get to work on that. You get to work on enjoying the rest of your summer, and I will see you all soon.